Hey everybody, we're back. Time to talk about happiness, or as Ekman's book calls it, the enjoyable emotions. I think I made a pretty decent case in the last video that some of the things that he's characterizing as the less enjoyable emotions, some people enjoy. So that's why I kind of laughed a little bit when I said the enjoyable emotions. Like these are the ones that we seek. I think that's a pretty good characterization of the emotions depicted in this chapter of the Ekman book. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So there are two facets of positive affect, two facets of those emotions that we seek, those enjoyable emotions. The first one is the pleasant affect, which can be assessed by the frequency with which people report feeling exuberant or happy or proud or amused or cheerful. In the Ekman book, he refers to the emotion of pride as fiero, which is kind of an interesting, it's like the fire that, fiero doesn't mean fire, it means wild. So anyway, he uses a slightly different terminology, but I mean, these are those feelings that the person might have that are pleasant and that they seek. And then there's positive involvement, and that's going to be measured by the frequency with which people feel interested, alert, inspired, attentive, and active. So there are two different aspects. Now, you may not necessarily be feeling fiero, but you might be completely absorbed and interested and attentive in what you're doing. And you would consider that positive involvement and probably consider it a positive affect that you're experiencing, right? So there are two facets, and they are decently correlated. They're moderately correlated, but only moderately correlated. So it is not necessary for you to be feeling, exuberant and involved at the same time, right? Like you're not exuberant and inspired necessarily all the time. You can be exuberant or inspired. The more exuberant that you are, maybe the more alert you are, but not a one-to-one relationship. So it's a good way to sort of think about it as two separate components. I think a lot of times we focus on the affect part of like happiness or the enjoyable emotions, and we kind of forget about the positive involvement part of the positive affect, right? We kind of forget about that. That really, if you're in a good mental place, like sort of, but with, the emotion driving it, it's going to cause you to be more engaged in what you're doing. So let's talk a little bit about lifestyle factors. So there are two main lifestyles that are addressed in the emotion literature, particularly having to do with positive affect. One is the hedonic lifestyle. That's where you hold values that are related to a pleasurable life, intimacy, social approval. Hedonic means to be, seeking the pleasures, right? So you want a pleasurable life. You want pleasurable intimate relationships. You want pleasurable social approval, right? You don't want to have social disapproval, which might be seen as not pleasurable, the opposite of pleasure. I don't know. They say all media attention is good media attention, even if it's negative. So maybe I'm wrong about that. But generally what we're talking about with the hedonic lifestyle is wanting to experience pleasure. So you pursue related activities, things that would help to build that pleasure. So maybe you buy something nice for yourself, or maybe you host a party or attend a party, trying to get that feeling of pleasure from being around other people. And maybe you could achieve that through going dancing, right? Or doing something with your friends where you feel like you'll experience that pleasure of, life factors, the pleasure of having intimate relationships, the pleasure of having social approval. Like you can imagine where maybe if you're the sort of person who likes to go dancing, it might be because you're good at it and you like being told that you're good at it. So you like to go dancing, right? And that would be part of that hedonic lifestyle. Hedonic lifestyle tends to be associated with pleasant affect, but not necessarily with positive involvement, right? So this is a pleasant emotion characteristic. Growth-related lifestyle, on the other hand, is where you hold values related to personal growth, the well-being of family and friends, societal engagement, these kinds of things. And it causes you to pursue related everyday activities like doing volunteer work, reading books, being politically active. These kinds of things help to further those growth-related strivings that a person might have. This tends to be associated with positive involvement, but not necessarily with pleasant affect. So hedonic lifestyle is supported by pleasant affect. Growth-related lifestyle is supported by positive involvement. Another way to look at it is that pleasant affect is supported by hedonic lifestyle and positive involvement is supported by growth-related lifestyle. These are correlated. I don't know if one's causing the other, but I can tell you that the hedonic lifestyle has the one facet of positive affect. Growth-related lifestyle tends to have the other aspect of positive affect. So activity aspirations, if you ask a person, what would you do if you had extra resources? And those extra resources could be time. Like you may find a person who has more than enough money to do the things they want to do, but they don't have the time. Or it could be the opposite. They have plenty of time, but they don't have the money to do it. So when they ask people about their activity aspirations, what they ask is if time and money were not an issue. So if you could do whatever you wanted, you had the money to do it, and you had the free time to do it, what would you do? What would you do with that free time or that extra money? So people who are driven by pleasant affect, they tend to report hedonic aspirations. They say, I'd buy a bigger house. Or they say, if I had the time, I would talk with more of my friends, right? They tend to not reveal growth-related aspirations, like I would go to museums around the world, or I would read all the classic books, or something like that. So people who are driven by pleasant affect tend to report these hedonic aspirations. It's the reverse for people who tend to experience positive involvement. They tend to say, I'd rather visit museums around the world and read all the classic books, and they're less likely to say, I want to buy a big house or talk more with my friends. So you have, different activity aspirations based on which type of lifestyle you're driven by. If you're driven by the hedonic lifestyle, you say hedonic kinds of things. If you're driven by the growth-related lifestyle, you tend to say growth-related things to fill your time and your money. And then finally, we see, and I don't know if age is a lifestyle. It sort of happens to you. It doesn't not really a lifestyle, but I put it here anyway because it's kind of all related. In the surveys that they've conducted, we have respondents as young as 15 and as old as 70 responding to these surveys. So it's not a full spectrum of all humanity, that's for sure. But what they have found is that there is a negative relationship, a negative correlation between pleasant affect and a hedonic lifestyle. So what you see is that older people are less likely to report a pleasant affect and to be pursuing a hedonic lifestyle. But it's positively related to positive involvement and a growth-related lifestyle. So again, older people are more likely to report pursuing positive involvement and a growth-related lifestyle. So when we're younger, we tend to be seeking pleasant affect and a hedonic lifestyle. As we age, we tend to value more the positive involvement and the growth-related lifestyle. And it's kind of interesting because as people age, on average, they start to have more access to resources. They've started to climb in their careers. They start to earn more money, things like that. Their kids might be grown, and so they have more time available to them, things like that. And so it's kind of interesting that as they have more resources available to them is when they start to show positive involvement and growth-related lifestyle as their strivings, right? So just at the time when they could really just engage all that hedonic lifestyle and pleasant affect striving, they actually go, you know what, that's not fulfilling. That's not really where I want to put my energy. I want to put my energy into positive involvement and a growth-related lifestyle. I'm going to say an aside that I didn't bother to put into the slides, but I'm going to put a little aside for those of you who have ever taken any lifespan development class or child and adolescent, or even if you paid attention during the developmental chapter of Intro to Psych, probably you were introduced to Erik Erikson and his model of psychosocial development. And he would say that the reason why people who are older tend to show more strivings towards positive involvement in a growth-related lifestyle is because they're trying to show generativity, right? Like they have started to realize that their purpose in life is to leave a mark on the future generations, or to mentor other people, or to, write a book, or to, things like that. And when we're younger, that's not really our goal, right? But as we get older, when we get into midlife in particular, he says that's when we start to show generativity. So if you wanted to overlap these findings with what Erikson said about, psychosocial development, they kind of line up. All right. our state of happiness influences all facets of our life. That's probably not super surprising. You'll just have to memorize this, amazing fact. But, the degree of happiness that a person's having influences everything. So, for example, people who are in a state of happiness, or at least in a positive mood, tend to do more good deeds. We call it the feel good, do good phenomenon. So people who are already in a good mood are more likely to be helpful. And you may have noticed this in yourself, where maybe you agreed to do something helpful, someday in the future, because you were in a good mood at the time that the person asked you. And then by the time it's time to do the thing, you're like, man, I don't want to. Because maybe you're no longer in the good mood that caused you to volunteer. But that's, we see this from little small things like, if you're entering a building and you're in a good mood, you're more likely to check and see if somebody's following behind you and hold the door for them, and rather than letting it slam in their face. That's not necessarily like the world's biggest, random act of kindness to not let the door slam in the face of the person behind you. But we do see that people who are in a good mood are more likely to notice that there's somebody behind them and stop and hold that door so it doesn't slam in their face. All the way up to bigger things like volunteering your time. Your younger sibling says, man, I don't understand this math. And, you're a college student, you already understand it. And so you can sit down and tutor them. If you're in a good mood, you're much more likely to agree to do that than if you're in a bad mood. And all the way up to donating money, and all sorts of different measures have been used to assess to what degree does feeling good cause you to do good. And at all levels, people who are in a good mood tend to be more helpful, more charitable, kinder, things like that while they're in that good mood. Our subjective well-being. I've got a person who appears to be experiencing some well-being while out on a hike. I just pull these things off the internet, so I don't know the story behind any of these, so I just make up stories. So this person appears to be in a good mood while taking a hike. This is our self-perceived happiness or satisfaction with life, is what we mean by subjective well-being. So it may not be that another person would think that you're experiencing great well-being. Another person might be like, wow, you don't have very much income, or you live in this sketchy neighborhood, or you don't even own a bike, let alone a car. They might be looking at things like that and say, oh, I don't think you would be, very happy or satisfied with life, because look at all the things you're missing. But it doesn't matter whether it's objectively true. What matters is if you feel like it's true. So if you feel satisfied with your life, if you feel happy. Subjective well-being is used along with other measures of objective well-being to evaluate people's quality of life. And so we're going to talk about this as this this module goes on, that a lot of times in research we'll ask the person, how happy are you, basically? How happy are you with your life? And then lay over it factors that might not even be specific to that individual. Sort of, well, should you be happy given where you live? Or should you be happy given the access to healthcare? Or should you be, right? Like these kinds of questions. And so subjective well-being is your perceived happiness. And my second bullet point is not saying that we're going to moderate it necessarily with these objective measures, but a lot of times we will compare a person's degree of happiness with sort of what society expects would make you happy. Right, to find out that a lot of times happiness is unrelated to these sort of objective measures. People who are living in poverty are oftentimes much happier than people who are, exceptionally wealthy and have access to everything. And that, we have to try and develop theories to explain why that happens. I'm sure you have some theories in your mind about why that might be true. So let's talk just for a second about positive psychology, and then I'm going to stop talking and let you watch a TED Talk about it. Just in case you haven't met positive psychology yet, it's the study of human functioning with the goals of discovering and promoting strengths and virtues that help individuals and communities to thrive. Positive psychology really came on the scene in the 1990s with people like Martin Seligman and David Myers and other people whose names aren't coming to the top of my head right quickly, who started to say, we're so focused on what causes negative things in psychology, what causes depression and what causes anxiety and other kinds of negative things, that we're kind of ignoring this whole group of people who are resilient in the face of adversity and who have positive outlooks on life and who are flourishing even independent of their experiences. The research areas within positive psych, you'll see it if you take like health psychology, you'll see it there. You see it in an emotions class, you see it in neuroscience classes, you see it in education classes. So these are areas where people have been really looking at the impact of, having positive affect, positive engagement, things like that. The three pillars of positive psychology are positive well-being, positive character, and then communities and culture, right? Like how can we build more positive, stronger communities and culture that can really foster flourishing and resilience and things like that. So it's this newer field, but it's one that a lot of people are really engaged in and really enjoy and really think, man, this took a long time. Now, just to give you a little perspective, it didn't take a long time. Back in the 1950s, humanism came along, and it was very much the precursor to positive psychology. If you know your Carl Rogers, you know that he was very interested in the fact that the facts that will contribute to a person having high levels of well-being and self-confidence and all these things, but it was really at the individual level. Positive psychology has extended it out to communities and culture. All right, so that's my little preview for you. And now I want you to go ahead and in the playlist, you'll see Sean, I think his name is pronounced Acor, but I'm not positive. I've never heard him say it. So he's going to talk a little bit about the happiness advantage. He's written a couple of books on happiness. And so this is one of the most popular TED Talks on the whole TED system. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side of the video.